Back in 2024, the UN made a report that claimed that manga and anime promotes gender stereotypes and violence against women and children. Pretty ironic considering that the anime and manga medium actually has less gender stereotypes than Western media does, but okay, UN. It's also ironic for another reason, which is just disgusting, because the UN peacekeepers have been accused of doing things that I would never be able to even say on YouTube. This is to say that the UN is a very corrupt and morally bankrupt organization. But the UN is in the news once again in anime circles over the last 24 hours or so, because now they decided to hold this interview with the mangaka of Hat Atelier, to which Kodansha has also been promoting this interview. The United Nations interviewer really tries to push this narrative that female mangakas don't really exist and are only now starting to become somewhat of a thing. It's very clear that, as usual, the UN is operating in bad faith and once again trying to push specific untrue narratives onto the anime medium. It's unfortunate that the manga of Witch Hat, Shirahama, has even played into their game by giving them this interview. However, many people across the world are calling out the UN and Kodansha for this, which resulted in Kodansha going on a mass blocking spree where they seem to have blocked almost everyone who pointed out the hypocrisy going on here. But let's take a look at what some people from Japan specifically are saying about this. In response to anime updates talking about this interview news, this account says, "There's a misunderstanding here. Women manga artists have been quite numerous since the 1970s. There are plenty of creators who became legends in boys manga and in girls manga. Male creators have drastically decreased. Even in adult manga, women creators hold a certain proportion. It's not that they've only started increasing now. They've been around in droves for a long time, leaving behind tremendous achievements." Now, once again, we have some irony here with the UN, because with the UN trying to push this specific narrative, this untrue narrative, they're the ones actually diminishing the hard work of female mangakas throughout history. Another Japanese account here saying they're piggybacking on the Japan moe art bashing to spread propaganda, using that manga by the author who was jumping on the bandwagon. Kodansha's US subsidiary's ideology, it's a you-know-what situation. Another Japanese user took the interview, which was published in English and machine translated to Japanese, to read it, and they go on to say, "It's pretty awful. Or rather, why is it that people in overseas, those circles, can't praise female creators unless they're lying about the manga industry being some male-dominated society?" They'd get a response from an English user that says it's because the UN is not praising it with good intentions. They want to influence the industry. They make a fake problem with their globalist beliefs being the solution. They're using the work as a way to try and push their ideology onto Japan. The Japanese OP responds and says all they gotta do is focus on their day jobs. Those folks. And another English response to the OP saying the UN is always talking about how anime is a problem, but suddenly they're fine with this one? Makes you think there's something going on. Spanish Twitter is also getting involved with calling this stuff out. For example, this tweet that reads, "Rumiko's already been in the industry for like 50 years, and these guys are telling you that women in manga are only just now getting prominence? LMAO." However, some people are defending the United Nations interview. For example, this YouTuber Lines in Motion, who had written on Twitter, "Great interview," and insights by Shirahama, absolutely blockfest in the replies and quote retweets though. So I guess Lines in Motion doesn't like people pointing out the hypocrisy of the UN, the corruption of the UN. They would get a response from someone talking about the critical comments where Lines in Motion then added this: "A lot of fans knew this would eventually happen. Literally any female mangaka who shows to be left-leaning will get bombarded with hate and accusations of being an industry plant. Yuki Tsugu had a massive backlash when tweeting in support of BLM, etc., etc." So this is a very strange take. It has nothing to do with the mangaka being a female. If it was a male mangaka, they'd be getting the same exact criticism right here. The fact of the matter is, as people have pointed out, as we've been discussing, as people in Japan are also pointing out, there's hypocrisy with the UN, who has previously called out anime and manga and disparaged the entire industry, and even attempted to frame Japan as problematic. Let's not forget the UN had previously also said that Japan was misogynistic because they refused to have a female emperor, which was such a ridiculous claim. There's a lot of examples of stuff like this. So yeah, people are pointing out the hypocrisy. It has nothing to do, again, with the mangaka being female. Now, it's also funny how so many leftists, like Lines in Motion here, want to support the UN and BLM, and they act like you need to support those organizations. It's like, dude, you can have a discussion about policies related to worker reform without supporting corrupt organizations, but these people never do that. They want to support the corruption, which seems like a very unwise and weird stance to take, but we see this time and time again. For example, Danny here acting like people should support the UN and support BLM. So the UN, as mentioned, has many credible reports where people talk about the horrible things that their members have done in various countries to women and children. And BLM, they've taken money from black communities. They have actually taken money out of black communities and redistributed that money to wealthy elites. For example, one of the top members of BLM, one of the co-founders, was a African-American woman who took some of the money earned from BLM and actually bought multiple $1 million+ mansions. The millions that she took from BLM donors, that should have went back to black communities, but instead it went into her pockets. Anyways, that's Lines in Motion for you. Moving on to the next part of the video, as we have another viral tweet here from Spanish Twitter criticizing this interview. It reads, "The animosity toward the author of Little Witch Atelier doesn't stem from having a different ideology, quote unquote, but from a direct act of aggression." By the way, they meant to say Witch Hat Atelier, of course. In that interview, agreeing with claims like manga is a medium dominated by men, or women must remain anonymous to survive in the medium, is dishonest and erases the history and work of multiple important mangakas just because you're being spotlighted as a good example. What would be the goal of supporting those narratives if not to appeal to a certain type of people and organizations? It's such a blatant lie when you've opposed those discourses yourself in the past, and that's what rubs people the wrong way. This is not to mention that the UN has been a pain in the you-know-what for the anime/manga industry with all the pressure they've applied to censor it. In that sense, people see the author's collaboration with them as a betrayal. I'm not commenting on the manga itself since I haven't read it, and honestly it looks like the author is a good artist. I wouldn't rule out the manga being a 10 out of 10 or something like that, but let's not play dumb. Promoting the anime is sexist discourse in big 2026 is tiresome, and it's obvious you're going to get pushback for winning sponsorships with that kind of tactic. Madam Savvy also getting involved here, saying, looks like Kodansha is fully UN and WEF integrated, including a number of screenshots. On the first page from their website on sustainability, they talk about things like wanting to bring anime and manga to a global audience worldwide and to be the steward of things like freedom and diversity. And when you look at that, they also go on to talk about how in 2020, Kodansha became a member of the United Nations SDG Media Compact. And to no one's surprise, they then talk about identifying issues based on international guidelines and survey criteria used by ESG assessment organizations. This isn't surprising at all considering that they've been pushing DEI rhetoric, and DEI is of course the method that corporations use to try to raise their ESG score in the hopes of appealing to massive capital funds like BlackRock. Turning to Kodansha's tweet where they were promoting the interview between the United Nations and Shirahama, I forgot to mention one thing. I did at the start tell you how they went on a mass blocking spree, essentially blocking everyone who was criticizing them and pointing out the hypocrisy of this interview and the corruption of the UN. But they also ended up shutting down their responses as well, locking down their responses entirely. That's the latest, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Look forward to seeing you in the comments and in the next one.